I love the marketplace. I used to call it all the time, I'm getting bloody in the marketplace because I'm living life out and I'm going for it spiritually in every way. I mean, if you were to ever talk to people that I worked with in the marketplace, they would say I was a pretty passionate guy that was singularly focused, that we can do this, we can build this, we can fix this, we can make this happen. And if you were to talk to somebody about my spiritual discipleship and how I mentor people, it would be the same way.
You're listening to the Faith and Work podcast, where we explore ways to serve God and others in our daily work to bring life and hope to workplaces and cities.
Welcome to the Faith and Work podcast. I'm Ross Chapman, your host for today. I serve as the CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work, and I am thrilled to introduce you to another episode of the Voices from the Workplace series. If you haven't been listening or if you've forgotten, this series is all about highlighting people who are living as faithful workers. And we want to learn from their stories and their experiences in their careers so that we can apply that to our everyday work, whatever our job might be. We think that you'll be encouraged to see how they're integrating their faith in their work in practical ways. Whether or not you actually do that role, care about that role, or ever see yourself in it, you actually will be encouraged in a variety of ways of how people start to ask these questions and wrestle with it. It's been an incredible series, so we're very, very excited. In this episode, we're going to explore a conversation around financial leadership. Most of us will never oversee the finances of a global company, but nearly all of us know something about responsibility, trust, difficult decisions, incomplete information, disappointing people, and carrying the burdens that others may never see. This is stuff that we do in our everyday work. Our guest today is Chris Festog. He has spent nearly 4 decades working in executive finance, including leadership roles with organizations like Texaco. He serves on the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business Advisory Board and is on the Board of Trustees of the Colorado Symphony. Always nice to know how people are using their volunteer time. He's also the author of the best-selling book, The CFO Advantage, published by Entrepreneur Books. And it's a book about how finance leaders can move beyond accounting and compliance, the technical stuff of the job, to become strategic leaders, communicators, developers of people, and shapers of organizational culture. He also writes for Forbes. He's a great speaker, and he has a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business. He is currently serving as the chief financial officer of a local nonprofit here in Denver called Cross Purpose. We are so excited to have this conversation. I know that you'll benefit from it. All right, Chris, welcome to the Faith and Work podcast.
Well, thank you, Ross, for inviting me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we're grateful to our producer, Naomi, for connecting us. Okay, so Chris, you've written a book called The CFO Advantage, elevating your role from financial technician to visionary business leader. Let's just jump in. I'm just curious. You spent like a long time doing this work, but when people hear CFO, what do they get completely wrong?
Well, that's an interesting question because they don't always get it wrong. Frequently, when people think about CFOs, they think of just the highest level bean counter in an organization who is primarily financial statement, financial analytics oriented, making sure the books are done, the audit's done. And they would be right. Yeah. A big reason I wrote the book and a big mandate I've had my whole career is to teach financial people that that is not their role, that they need to move beyond technical to being a business person. And not only that, they need to actually grow as an individual. What organizations need are powerful, thoughtful, innovative, creative, excited, passionate stewards. In fact, the 3 themes throughout the whole book are stewardship, leadership, transformation.
Yeah. That's
what not just CFOs, but every person in the organization should be. And that's what the book's about.
That is cool. So if that's the perception, maybe one perception you could help us with would be, does that mean those financial people, they don't really talk to people, they're not very relational? I'm only sat with you for about 20 minutes, and I can already tell that that's not true about you. So, right. What part of the job is maybe more relational than people realize?
It all is. I mean, really, especially when you get to the upper levels, controller, CFO in an organization, is you are should be interacting with virtually everybody in the organization. I think that when you get, part of what I say in the book is, hey, if you want to be the CFO of Google or Goldman Sachs, don't read my book, right? Because even though it might help you, there are levels of being a CFO that I never attained to, right? But for 99% of the businesses out there,
Right.
This book and the truths in this book, more importantly, will help you grow no matter what you are. If you're 3 years in, it'll make you better. If you're a manager, it'll make you better. If you're a controller, it'll make you better. And if you're a CFO, it'll make you better. And so, I think that a lot of people ask me about the CFO Advantage and how it applies to just financial people or to everybody. I always say, actually, it would relate to anybody really in the marketplace role. I tailored it to the CFO and financial space because my stories, my experiences really resonate there. And quite honestly, I think the encouragement and coaching is needed there.
Yeah.
So over the years, the book is really stories of how I've had to help financial people and other people grow. Right. And so it's really what this is about.
Yeah, that's one thing I appreciate about the book was your emphasis on developing people, character. You're moving from the nuts and bolts of the job of financial management, leadership to, what does it mean to really move an organization forward, but to care about the people around you and to care about the work you're doing in a deeper way than,
Absolutely.
Just a means to an end, which is a lot of the stuff that we like to talk about on the Faith and Work podcast is God actually cares about the work you do every day.
Absolutely.
Not just what it could potentially do in terms of sharing your faith or being generous. So we're glad to be talking about this with you. I saw a post you had something about your dad saying, if you want to really get into business, you should do accounting.
Right.
Tell me that story. How did that work? Tell us a little bit about your family. Where did that come from?
Yeah.
Because it obviously left a big impression.
I had a great dad, and he was a controller here in Denver of a manufacturing company. Depression era kid. He got his degree at 38 years old. Didn't get a break until late in life. Really always, in my view, as I look back, really kind of underestimated what he was and how good he was. Mm-hmm. But he was excellent. I think at what he did, had a really good reputation in the organization he worked. In fact, I used to, both my brothers and I all worked in his company during the summer. So we actually got to see behind the scenes, what people thought of my dad. And they thought a lot of him. I thought a lot of him. Yeah, when I was a senior in college, I talked to Dad and I said, I'm thinking of either being a carpenter or an accountant. And being a Depression era kid, he said wisely, be an accountant, they make more money. You can do carpentry on the side for fun. Which is, strangely enough, is actually what I've done in my life. Wow. Is I practically built houses and I've, been a financial guy. But he also used to talk about having entrepreneurial opportunities that he kind of regretted missing. Mm-hmm. And I think that really kind of stuck with me. So when I wanted to go to college, I actually wanted to start a business. And that's when he said that quote. He's like, Chris, if you want to understand business, go into accounting because every transaction has an economic footprint. Mm-hmm. And it's the accounting people, it's the CFO, the controller that know everything that's happening in the company and why. Most CEOs are financial accountants.
Yep.
And the reason for that is because if you're a good accountant, you understand technically what's happening in the company, but you've gone beyond that to actually understand the business behind the numbers.
I've seen that to be true, for sure. That's really cool. Well, and obviously, what a gift to have a father that had such a great impact on you, and that's so cool. Okay, so let's talk about the actual work and how you, in your own faith journey, kind of connected the dots between the thing that I'm doing every day at work. God really cares about that, and so maybe I approach it differently. Was there a moment in your career where those things connected more clearly for you, or is it always kind of there, or did you have a curiosity about it? How'd that play out for you?
I try to live a life from a theological foundation. So when I was a freshman in college at University of Colorado Boulder, and I just became a Christian in November of that year, I began to already deal with what happens when I'm in business as a Christian. Mm-hmm. What does that look like? How do I make decisions? How do I deal with political pressures or other pressures that might be put upon me? And what does that mean in terms of my time? So I already began to work through how it might impact my job, right? From an ethics, morality, that kind of perspective.
Right. Yep.
But when I did 2 years in Denver with Arthur Anderson when I got out of college, and then I went with Arthur Anderson to Bermuda, and everything changed in Bermuda. It's really when I mystically experienced God. I was filled with the Spirit. I mean, my life was turned upside down. God showed up, and my life was never the same. And for 20 years, I prayed to be a pastor because we're supposed to desire the greater gifts. But at the same time, he taught me actually how to be really good at what I was doing. And that wasn't easy necessarily. I had all kinds of lessons I had to learn. But the truth was, I loved what I did, but I also wanted to build the kingdom. I also loved the church. I also loved discipleship. I also loved small groups. So I was basically, from about 25 years old, bivocational. I worked like crazy. I dedicated, for the most part, 50 hours a week to work, because if you're going to excel in the financial space, in the business space, it's at least 50 hours. From my experience working at Arthur Anderson, where we used at times to work ungodly amount of hours.
Yeah.
When I would watch people work, you hit the 50-hour threshold, productivity falls about 50%. You get over the 60 hours, it drops another 25%. So I never could understand,
80, 90 hour work
80,
weeks.
90 hour works. And people tell me they do that, and I just look at them like, you're a nut, right? So I was enjoying and kind of working in that space, but at the same time, I had this passion and zeal for God and to build his church and to care for his people. And I wanted to be a pastor. He had equipped, as best as I could tell, me in many ways with pastoral gifts, to teach or to preach or to care for people or to think strategically. Yeah. So I went to seminary, I led small groups, I taught, I helped start churches. Bottom line is my wife and I, we would move for a job, but we wouldn't move till we knew there was what church we were going to. So moving was never about the job. It was always a dual call when we moved. Sometimes if we saw a church, like in Virginia, I saw a church I want to be a part of, I prayed and we waited a year before I found a job in Virginia, and then I took a new job and I went down and became part of that church. So we have always been, Karen and I, there is no sacred secular divide in our world. Everything is for God and in our just enjoyment of him as he loves and leads us in our lives, right? So
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it seems like from an early point in your career, you had a vision for participating with what God was doing in your church life and teaching and those kinds of things, but also in your financial leadership roles, not seeing those as separate, like right, divided as one is more important than the other, but kind of leaning into the things God's been asking you to do in all those areas. And, that's certainly one of the things we want to help people imagine about their everyday work, is that it's something that God's invited us into. It may not be the job you do forever. It may not be the best fit. It may not even be the thing you trained for, like accounting and then moving to something else. But it's an opportunity to join with what God's doing in that place and care about the people there. Sounds like you did all that. Mm-hmm. You have made an interesting pivot to nonprofit work. And I was curious kind of how you envision and imagine that. I know it's kind of a fractional role with a nonprofit here in Denver. But you spent so much time in the marketplace. You've written a book for the marketplace. I'm curious, what's been your experience of the nonprofit world? And do you think of that as marketplace, or do you think of that as totally different? Or do you see that work as spiritually more impactful than the work you were doing before? Like, how do you think through those things?
So I've been doing this for about 2 years. And the question, and I quasi-retired from New York, being in Manhattan, come here, do the nonprofit work. So the normal question everybody asks is, what's it feel like to be giving back?
Oh, yeah. Right.
And I look at them and I say, well, I've been doing it for 40 years. I said, it feels pretty darn good all the time. And in truth, I mean, I love where I'm working. I think it's an amazing organization. I think a lot of people are in the nonprofit space or Christian workspace because they feel like they please God more there.
Right.
And I think part of my role in that organization is to challenge So when people say, why are you here, Chris? Because God called me. It's not because there was this particular passion for this particular thing. It's like if God could have called me to go down and help a pizza shop grow to 2X, but he didn't. He called me to come to this not-for-profit and help them grow and to do some new things. I am glorifying God in both places. It doesn't matter to me. What is fundamental to the Christian experience is, are you doing what God has called you to? If you are not where God called you, you're sinning. You're out of step with what he's called you to. God never called me to be a vocational pastor. If I had been a vocational pastor, I would have sinned. But he didn't, and he made it really clear. And actually, to just open up the page a little bit, I mean, at one point, he actually spoke to me, not audibly, but spoke to me in my heart and mind and just told me about David, right? And David wanted to build the temple, and he said no. And the reason he gave David that you can't build the temple, he said, David, you're a man of war, and you have blood on your hands, and I want a man of peace to build my temple. And he said, Chris, I've made you a man of war, you have blood on your hands, and I want men of peace to be my pastors. And he's right. I mean, it's not that, that's obviously allegorical, but the truth is, I love the marketplace. I used to call it all the time, I'm getting bloody in the marketplace because I'm living life out and I'm going for it spiritually in every way. I mean, if you were to ever talk to people that I worked with in the marketplace, they would say I was a pretty passionate guy that was singularly focused, that we can do this, we can build this, we can fix this, we can make this happen. And if you were to talk to somebody about my spiritual discipleship and how I mentor people, it would be the same way, is that this is not a game. This is an amazing opportunity to glorify God in everything we do. Mm-hmm. So I firmly believe that like when Van Gogh, let's talk about Van Gogh wrote, he painted Starry Night, right? Everybody knows Starry Night. And so I'd ask the question, does that picture glorify God? And most people would say yes, because it's so beautiful and it's so well done. And even though Van Gogh's spiritual journey is quite fascinating, but most people would say, yeah, I mean, there's a beauty in it. It's like Mozart, it's like there's a beauty in the music, there's a beauty in the artistry. So that glorifies God, right? Well, so when I built something at work that God called me to, when I built a new real estate venture, or when I built and improved a business process, or if I built in a team and gave them new skills and new abilities, does that glorify God? Absolutely. Because God called me to do that. So if we really understand our relationship with Christ, the person that really helped me understand this is Brother Lawrence, right? Brother Lawrence wrote that book most people have read, The Practice and Presence of God. And what I love, the phrase I loved in his book was he said he worshiped the God of pots and pans. Mm-hmm. He chose not to do more in his monk little world. He chose to be in the kitchen washing the pots and pans. Fascinating enough, St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila all actually were very close. St. John of the Cross used to care for Avila's nuns. Brother Lawrence used to write to them and encourage them. So you got three people in the 1300s that were really pre-Reformation, understanding God in a new way. Mm-hmm. And this guy's view of God was he is glorified in cleaning pots and pans. If we don't understand that, we don't understand our role in the marketplace. We don't understand our role in this world. Does that make sense?
That's great. Hi, I'm Ross Chapman, CEO at Denver Institute for Faith and Work. We want to see a future where every person's work brings hope and life to their city, which is a contrast with society's views of work, and for now, it's often a contrast with the views of work we hear at church. That's why I'm excited to share with you that we are currently in the midst of our FOR campaign. That's the FOR campaign, meaning this is a vision for the future of work, workers, church, and cities. Like you, we've noticed a lack of accessible, biblically grounded, and excellent vocational discipleship opportunities. This gap is causing many to have an anemic or a lifeless vision of their work. Vocational discipleship can come from many places in your life, such as this podcast. And as we seek to expand those opportunities with high-quality content over the next 5 years, our aim is to help 100,000 people recognize and affirm their daily work is central to joining God in his vision and work to make all things new. If you've been encouraged and discipled by thoughtful conversations that you hear on the Faith and Work podcast, or if your life has been shaped by Denver Institute in some way, I encourage you to help advance this mission through the way you work and by giving. Will you consider a one-time, quarterly, or monthly gift to support this work? If so, visit the give page at denverinstitute.org to get started. I mean, I couldn't say it better myself. I do want to go back. You said you felt a sense of calling.
Right.
I think across Christian traditions and just people, some people feel a sense of calling pretty strongly to a particular kind of role. Others don't. What did that look like for you? How did you know that was your calling?
The vocation, or just in everything?
Yeah. Well, you felt called to the marketplace. You wanted to be there.
And I felt called in how I was serving a church, right? And I felt called. So, wow, we could go on a different podcast on that one, right? But how do you understand calling?
What did it feel like for you?
One, it has to align with Scripture, so it's obviously not something that I'm not supposed to do from Scripture. That's number one. But really how I have found God works in my life from a calling perspective, he wells it up in me. It's like, how do you know who you're supposed to marry? It's just like, boing, there she is, right? And it's like, I got to marry that girl, and it's so funny how many people we talk to. I could have been married in 2 dates. I mean, I knew Karen for a year before I ever actually took her out in Bermuda. We went on 2 dates. I probably could have got married right away because it was like something happened. So God, if you were talking about calling in my life, typically how it works, like let's say I'm working in a job, God always releases before he calls, typically in my life. So I might be in a job 2-3 years, enjoying it, making things happen. And then there will begin to be a sense of accomplishment, a sense of you're done here, Chris. Maybe done relationally, done with the people, done with the business component of it. He's made me in a way to impact. I'm not a very good manager. Actually, people who work with me would probably be smiling right now if they heard that. But I build things and fix things and build processes, and then I give them to people that have strategic and leadership skills, but they also have more of a strength in being able to maintain something that's already been built and developed. And that really pervades everything I kind of do is that I've had to learn. I think there's two kinds of people. There are people that jump before they should, and there are people that won't jump. They just won't do things. They're afraid to move. It's really important you understand who you are on that equation. If you are afraid to move, then you might need to learn to take steps quicker. I've had to learn to stop. My overall view in following calling, I'm not going to forget this question, is you can't steer a ship in harbor. Mm-hmm. So I've had a strong conviction that God, and if there's ever times like I'm not quite sure what to happen, it's like, God, you know what? I'm pushing out of harbor based upon the light that I have. I'm going to trust you for this, and you got to lead me. But I'm not just sitting here. Now, I've learned to wait, and I do sit more than I used to, and it's been good. It's been good for my heart and ability to wait. Like, I knew I was done in New York, but I waited 2 years. I commuted 2 years long distance every week, and everybody's like, why are you doing this? It's because I don't know what I've been released to do yet. Mm-hmm. And so I'm still there. And ultimately, I found cross purpose, and that's why I like put in my notice a month later when I found out about it. And I knew immediately this is what God was calling me to next. So he releases, and then he wells up within me. It begins to be a longing. It begins to be an interest. It incubates, but I begin to just hear and understand what is the next step. And there are very few times where there's never been a time he wrote it on the wall, but there are times where he makes it very clear, this is your next step. But the underlying thing that's really most important here, though, Ross, is I don't care if I get it wrong. I really don't. If I'm doing what I think God wants to call me to, this is a God who loves me. I'm like his kid. If I'm making a decision, the best decision I can of what I think he wants me to do, and I get it wrong, what's the downside of this? Is my loving father is going to like, hey, Chris, let's go this direction. I didn't really want you to go there, so let's learn a little lesson here, but we're going to move this direction, right? So if you're not pursuing yourself, money, riches, power, all the things that the world offers, and you're pursuing the things of God and you're really trying to hear him, he says, my sheep hear my voice. It's not complicated, but you got to take the time to listen, and then you got to be willing to follow. And that requires faith. And I love the faith component of this life is just you don't always know why or how things are happening, but man, it's awesome. The journey is incredible.
Oh, love that answer. Which character trait have you had to grow the most over your 40 years? Specifically in your work. And maybe other ones outside of work.
All right, so I've done all these strength finders and all those kind of things. So what? There's 35 strengths, and I think empathy is number 35 for me every time, which is why I married Karen, because that's probably number one for her. So, I've had to, and practically, I will never be empathetic. I am sympathetic. I attempt to really understand and care for people, but I just don't feel it. A lot of people just feel it. And so I just have understood I'm wired in a particular way. But I think that because I'm so strategic and I'm always thinking forward, and I think I've been imparted for a good bit of faith that I can not say thanks enough. I cannot celebrate enough. I cannot feel the needs of the team enough. Because for me, the call and the purpose is always what's most important. Yep. It doesn't matter if I die, I'm doing it. And I just assume everybody's always on that same plate, and they're not, because God hasn't called us and made us in the same way.
Right.
So I've had to learn, and I think I have learned how to do that much better.
Do you have a particular story or interaction that comes to mind where you would say, like, oh, my younger years would have totally responded differently to this same situation, that I'm seeing 20, 30 years later?
Hey, I think probably half the stories in the book I wrote are from my first 5 or 6 years of work. I just had to learn so much in those years. When I went to Texaco as controller of Texaco, was there for 5 years. My first job that wasn't public accounting. So I had 25 people on my team, and I really wanted to be a good manager, and there was a lot of stuff we needed to do and build and accomplish. And I wasn't a very good manager. I didn't understand people. If I was frustrated with somebody, I didn't know how to engage it. So probably, I don't know if this completely aligns, but one of my favorite stories that I really had to learn to listen is I wanted to care for people, but then they would irritate me because they wouldn't do their job right. Right.
Right.
And I didn't take that very well. So I wouldn't get irritated, but they could tell I was irritated. And there was this gal in Texaco, and she's a single mom, 2 kids. I'm like, and I think she's doing a pretty good job, but she's not getting it all done. But I wouldn't tell her. I would just show it on my face. And so she finally came into the office one day, and she said, Chris, why won't you tell me the truth? I said, what are you talking about? She said, you're not happy with my work. Why won't you tell me? And I said, okay, I think you do this well, but I'm not happy with this, and this. And she said, okay. And she turned and walked out of my office, and she turned around 180 degrees, and she killed it, which gave me a great opportunity to say thanks and so forth. But the funny part was every 6 months, she would start lagging again. And so I would pull her in my room, and I would say her name. I said, hey, how you doing? She said, good. I said, how you performing? She said, okay. And I said, do we need to have a longer conversation? She said, no. I said, good. I said, I'll see you in 6 months. So there was other people make you better. If you're a student of yourself and of them.
Yeah.
So that was just where I wasn't fair. I wasn't honest. I wasn't compassionate. I was just getting irritated.
Yep.
And she taught me how to actually speak. And actually it was a lesson I've never forgotten and is formative as a manager and as a leader. You have to tell the truth. I've had more people thank me for firing them over my career because they would look at me and say, Chris, I know I'm underperforming, and you're the first person who would actually tell me the truth. And so that's what I do. When I hire people now, I tell them, I said, I'm going to hire for the next 3 years. I have a vision for this is what you're going to do. But I said, my commitment is to you and to the company. I said, if I can't offer you the opportunity you deserve, I will help you find another job. Because I may only have a certain size job. I may only have certain size positions. But my job is to make sure the company has what it needs, but I'm also to make sure I take care of you. So if you're not getting the job done, you won't be here. But if you deserve a better opportunity and I can't give it to you, you shouldn't be here, and I'm going to help you find something better. And if you're killing it and I have an opportunity, I want you to stay as long as you possibly can. And those are the lessons of truth and care, stewardship, right? That I'm a steward of the company, I'm a steward of the person, I'm a steward of God, of how I care for all of this. So I am by definition, a steward. I mean, that is a defining attribute of who I am.
Awesome. Yeah. Stewardship, leadership, transformation. That's in the book. I heard you say that earlier. What does money reveal about the character of a leader? And I mean, there may be many things. Maybe just give us one that you've noticed, maybe from a societal perspective or from a faith perspective, or both.
Money, Jesus got it pretty good when he said money reveals the heart. Mm-hmm. And in business, there are a lot of things that happen for money that shouldn't. Part of the journey, part of how my faith probably was reflected in the marketplace, perhaps more than others, is you couldn't tempt me with money. It's like, Chris, will you go along with this? We'll give you a raise or a promotion or this. No, it's not the right thing to do. I used to take jobs and not even know what the salary was. And in my 40 years of working, I never asked for a raise, because if I have to ask for a raise, it's already broke. Mm-hmm. Right? You must not think I'm good enough, or it's, I always tell my people, it's my job to make sure I'm paying you the right amount of money. That's my job as a steward, again, of you. I've always assumed my bosses have the same thing. Mm-hmm. And if they don't, then there's a little something broken. And so that really transfers. I mean, I've lived in some of the wealthiest cities in America, and money does not make your life better. I mean, the lack of money is hard. I'm learning that in working with poverty. There's no question, right? But fundamentally, how I understand this is when I have more money than I need and I'm still unhappy, there's nothing else. And that's where desperation comes in. That's why people drink or take drugs or get depressed or get anxious. So I've been in environments where the rich are not the healthiest, certainly not, even physically or mentally or whatever, but certainly not spiritually. But I think that in the church, and it also is a huge component of who you are in Christ. I used to get excited when my next raise or my big bonus came through because I could give more money. I mean, God has blessed me. I'm not crazy wealthy, but I've been blessed, and I've been able to, through different means, to be able to do a lot with some money. But there's even a different, I was having a good conversation with a friend just a few weeks ago, and we were talking about this. And we were talking about the difference between being generous and being sacrificial. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think those words, you can be a Christian that has this lovely relationship with God and have a generous life. And then I think there are those that understand that your life in Christ is sacrificial. You must deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. And what does that look like in everything you do? And I give generously. I don't always give sacrificially, but the truth is I want to lean that way. I want to lean in a way that I want to live life in a way. If there isn't a little bit of pain, if there isn't a little bit of suffering, or maybe more suffering, like when I was going to New York for 2 years, that was just flat out hard. Mm-hmm. Nobody understood it. I didn't fully understand what the heck God was doing, but I knew I wanted to be faithful to one side, and I wanted to wait on God on the other side and trust him. And he showed up in ways to really minister to me. Yeah. We find God in the valleys, not on the mountaintops. That's life in Christ. So if you're suffering, get ready for a great experience of God. Mm-hmm. And if you're on a mountaintop, he might pass by occasionally, but it's probably not where you're going to live your life most fully. I like mountaintops. I don't get that many of them.
Yeah,
I don't know how many people do.
Yeah, right on. Well, just a couple last questions. You can answer these more quickly. But if you're going to impart any kind of just financial leadership wisdom to any kind of worker, like what's something you might say, if we're in the business, we're making decisions and we're looking at income statements and we're looking at balance sheets, like, I don't know, like what would be some basic advice for that entrepreneur out there, the small business owner, maybe somebody who's in middle management, looking at their team, trying to figure out resources and opportunity and all that? What are some of the key things we might look at?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of life that doesn't seem that spiritual or that exciting that is really important. Working out every day is important, or eating healthy is important, and it's not sexy, right? So there are the number one reason for business failure is poor accounting. Mm-hmm. You haven't priced your product right. You haven't managed your cash flows. You don't know where your money's going. You're overspending on particular aspects. If you want to be successful in business, you got to understand economically and financially what's taking place. That just gets you off the starting line.
Yep.
So I think that my encouragement in that space is know what's going on, make sure you have good reporting and analysis, make sure you have good forecasting as to what is happening, and the accuracy of those forecasts is really important. And take time to really think through different ways of analyzing the information that you have. One of the things I get irritated with all the time is a static number, like I look at an income statement or balance sheet, and if it's just like this year versus last year. Okay, well, that's almost worthless. Mm-hmm. Show it to me over 12 months. Show it to me over 2 years. Show it to me by product line over a month or 2 years or 3 years. Show me it against plan, against actual, against prior year's actual. So numbers talk when they move in a time frame perspective and when they have dimensional perspective. Mm-hmm. And so that would probably be one of the critical things I would speak to is make sure your numbers are talking and don't just assume certain things based on some basic reporting.
That's great. That's super helpful. Last question. What's one lesson you believe every person should carry into their work on Monday morning? Not everybody listening is a CFO. So think about, what would you, if you could encourage kind of the church at work?
Yeah.
What would that be? What would you leave them with?
So my favorite picture of this question that I have right now is I'm convinced that Christians do not understand who they really are. If we really, son of the king and this and that, but if we really understood who we are in this world, not the people who have it all figured out and the egotists and arrogant people that say they're right theologically and all these different things, but the people who walk like Christ, who are like Christ, this is the picture I want everybody to imagine, is when you walk into a room, everything in that room changes. The compassion of God has just shown up. The wisdom of God has just shown up. The faith of God has just shown up. The anointing of God has just shown up. The creativity and innovation of God have just shown up. That everything in the room, the frustration, the fear, all those things will dissipate spiritually when you walk into the room. You don't have to do anything. You just need to be who God has made you to be. You don't go in there with all kinds of big statements and I'm going to do this and I'm the answer for, no. Maybe your answer is you just need to come alongside somebody. Maybe you just need to encourage somebody. Maybe you say, you know what, guys, I think we need to have faith to do this. Or maybe, guys, that's not the right thing to do. But the truth is you don't go in there thinking you're going to do all these things. You go in those and you do those because you are those things. And so if we really believe who Christ is and who we are in Christ, we understand that the fullness of who he is. And he was an amazing, he was an amazing God and an amazing man. So that's before every meeting I prayed. Before every meeting I went into is like when we talk about witnessing, is like, I never witnessed. The number one witness in a business is somebody who's so passionate and excited about Christ, they can't not talk about him and they can't not express who he is, right? And so I think that would be my encouragement is make sure you're called to what you're going into. If you're not called, you need to begin to deal with that right away. But if you're called, go there in the fullness of God, knowing that he's called you there and you have a purpose to transform, to live, to delight and enjoy this day. And you're going to enjoy it and you're going to delight in God and you are going to worship at work and everything you do.
Awesome. It reminds me of the painting that you mentioned earlier, the Starry Night. One of the things that's most memorable about that painting is that the church building is dark. And my image for what you just said is that this is to be celebrated because the church has left the building, entered the workplace, and that light that comes all throughout the city
awesome.
is actually the people of God in these particular buildings and places, and it's reflected in the heavens. It's this coming together of heaven and earth through that work.
I love that picture.
Chris, thanks so much for
Roz.
inspiring us, encouraging
Pleasure.
us, challenging us. What a joy to have you on the Faith and Work podcast. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, most of us will never serve as a CFO, but we all have something that's entrusted to us. We care for the resources we have. Maybe it's money, influence, relationships, information, opportunities. These are things that we've been entrusted with in our daily work. And these are opportunities to see our work as a place of formation where God is making us more and more like Him, but also an opportunity to join Him in the work that He's doing in the world. How is He loving people, caring for people, blessing people? He's doing it through us in our everyday work. So as you consider your next workday, you might ask yourself, what's been entrusted to me that I might be tempted to treat as though it belongs to me? Where might faithfulness require me to tell the truth, say no, make a courageous decision? Because that's what the numbers say. That's what the facts are. And who are you becoming through the way that you're carrying your responsibility? I do want to point you to the CFO Advantage. Chris wrote this from just simply, what does it mean to be a good CFO? It doesn't have a faith focus, but you got to hear a lot of that today from him. So this could be a good way to share this with a friend who's in financial leadership, just as a great book. And also we want to point you to the Starry Night image again. I hope that image gripped you. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, you can check out a message I gave at LifeGate Church here in Denver. We'll link to that in the show notes. There's a link to the CFO Advantage in the show notes. And if you don't even know what the Starry Night painting is, which I hope that you do, you can go to the show notes and grab a link to see that beautiful painting from Van Gogh. Thanks so much for listening to the Faith and Work podcast. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. That helps us spread the word and the good news about work that we're trying to share. And we want to encourage you and bless you in the work that you're doing today. Thanks for doing it with great faithfulness.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Faith and Work podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. The Faith and Work podcast is produced by Denver Institute. We believe that when Christians work faithfully, the world will taste the hope and life that Jesus provides. To learn more or to make a financial contribution, visit denverinstitute.org.